I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the importance of the U.S.-Canada trading relationship because I know this group knows it really well, and I'm also guessing that Warren might be talking about that just a little bit. So I won't spend a lot of time there. But what I do want to focus on briefly is on the rail industry, surprise, surprise, and cross-border security, and sort of what we have to do in the rail industry on this, and how that plays into overall competitiveness, trade, between our two countries, and why it's so important that things remain or even become more fluid between our two countries. We all know that the continued flow of free commerce is essential for our economic competitiveness, but at the same time, especially after the 9/11 attacks, there was a lot of attention focused, particularly on the U.S., but also in Canada, with increasing security to protect against terrorist threats, trying to make sure that there's a secure flow of goods, a secure infrastructure, and better information sharing and coordination between the two nations, in addition to broader initiatives that the U.S. government did having to do with other countries around the world. U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the Canada Border Services Agency have been very engaged, separate and apart, in working on a lot of initiatives. And the key focus for all of these initiatives is how do we enhance security to protect against terrorist threats, but also at the same time making sure that we don't impede the legitimate flow of commerce. And it's challenging because you oftentimes get people who are very well intentioned in the security portions of the government, and their focus is just on security. You get people focused on trade, it's just on trade. How do you get those to mesh so that you make sure that these two goals are not inconsistent? They are not inconsistent, but how do you make sure that you get to where you need to go? By way of background, CN clearly has a big interest in this. About 1/3 of our revenues last year were about $8.3 billion Canadian. About 1/3 of those revenues are affiliated with cross-border trade. And this can be trade that comes either between Canada and the U.S. A lot of it is trade that enters through the various seaports, the Canadian seaports, and then also Mobile and New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States. So we serve 3 coasts, coast to coast to coast, the only railroad that does that, transcontinentally across Canada and then down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. As you can imagine, the recent flooding in the United States has not been kind to us, and so that's it's been a bit of a challenge for us. We employ about 22,000 people across North America, pretty evenly divided between Eastern Canada, Western Canada, and the United States. And we carry a diversified mix of traffic, pretty much any commodity you could name. A lot of intermodal traffic. We love UPS, of course, and a lot of other customers that we have out there as well. And we are consistently striving to meet our customers' demands and their needs for timely and efficient service, but we've got to have a fluid border in order to be able to do that. We like to think of ourselves as a supply chain enabler. It's a term that our CEO uses all the time. We work closely with all of our partners in the supply chain to try to facilitate commerce. And we also, over the last 15 years, have embarked on a strategy of becoming more of a kind of NAFTA railway. CN over the years was transcontinental across Canada and then had the Grand Trunk here in Michigan. And that was really most of our U.S. presence. But since 1999, we've acquired several companies, including the old Illinois Central, the old Wisconsin Central, several smaller railroads, and then most recently the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railway just outside Chicago. And what all of these have done have made us a fairly substantial U.S. presence. We're the 5th largest railroad in North America, but it also makes us well positioned to deal with or to benefit from the north-south trading opportunities and commercial opportunities that arose from NAFTA, because we do go all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, into Louisiana, Mississippi, and then we have a marketing alliance with Kansas City Southern, which can get us into Mexico. So it's a real NAFTA success story. It's worked very well for us, and we're happy to say it's worked very well for our customers. And when we see this latest transaction, the EJ&E, which was a bit controversial in Chicago, but once that's fully implemented, that's going to help our trade between the two countries even more, because Chicago has been historically a huge choke point for traffic coming in through Canada or going back out of the United States back into Canada, because it would take so long for the trains to get through. There's just too much rail congestion. Through the EJ&E, we're able to bypass Chicago, go around on sort of a beltway system, and by doing that, it's going to facilitate trade. CN is part, of course, of the North American Railroad Network. I'm happy to say that railroads generally, no mode is perfect, but railroads generally are very safe and secure. Since the 9/11 attacks, the railroads have been aggressive in dealing with terrorist issues and threats and enhancing security overall. And so you have the first layer of security, which is that the railroads are inherently very safe. Secondly, of course, since the 9/11 attacks, the Canadian and U.S. governments worked very closely together on a number of initiatives. The Smart Border Declaration, from which the Smart Border Accord came, really was a giant, monumental step forward in terms of really looking at how could the two governments work together well, how do we make sure that we try to keep commerce moving, how do we have a more risk management approach to security so you don't go too overboard, but you do address legitimate security threats. And a number of new programs have been put in place, which I'm sure all of you folks are aware of, both in terms of personal security like Nexus, and then more commercial programs like CTPAT, FAST, Partners in Protection in Canada. So there are a lot of different, sort of an alphabet soup of various programs that are out there. CN, for instance, as have other railroads, have invested millions of dollars in our infrastructure to make sure that we can deal with these security threats. Just again, by way of background, in terms of what we deal with at the border, there's what we call a layered security approach. We don't call it that, the government officials call it that. But traffic that enters the United States from Canada, 100% of the traffic is screened through non-intrusive inspection technology. Try to say that fast. Otherwise known as VACIS, which is its trade name. Excuse me. No other mode has nearly that much coverage. Most other modes, it's about 3% of the traffic if it's coming in through a seaport or if it's coming in via truck. So there's a huge layer of security there. 2 hours before any of the commerce comes to the border, we have to provide electronically to U.S. Customs all the data about everything that's on all of these trains. So when they look at the VACIS, which is like a big X-ray, they can see if it's supposed to have widgets in that car. Yep, those are widgets. Wheels, wheels. You know, cars, cars. They can match all of this, make sure that everything's okay. If there's an anomaly, if they can't read the VACIS too well, they'll pull out a car and we'll set it out and they'll take a look and do an inspection. So the system works really very well. There's also an additional layer of security for anything that comes in through the Canadian seaports entering into North America, because they have security at those seaports. Many of the other seaports where the freight originates to come to Canada has the U.S. or Canadian security systems as well. So you've got layer upon layer upon layer of security. And in the case of rail, it's the highest level of security at the border because we do have this 100% VACIS. So the U.S. and Canadian governments have worked together very, very closely on this, and we're very pleased about that. We're also especially pleased at the February 2011 declaration made by Prime Minister Harper and President Obama, a little interesting there, about a U.S.-Canada perimeter security initiative, where they have created a Beyond the Border Working Committee and also the Regulatory Cooperation Council to really look at North American competitiveness, regulatory harmonization. How can we really make sure that those twin goals of security but trade facilitation are really met? And again, this initiative really has some promise. We're very excited about it. CN, I know the Chamber and a lot of other places and entities are participating fully in the consultative process that's ongoing on this, because we really need to get this right. North America needs to be competitive in the rest of the world, which means the U.S. and Canada need to work together even more closely, and all of our transport modes need to be part of that as well. And of course, I'm prejudiced, so rail really needs to be in there as well, really, really well. So we want to make sure going forward that all of the various security needs, trade facilitation needs are met. We do want to make sure that commerce is not impeded. We need harmonized regulations between the two countries as much as we possibly can, utilization of a risk management approach. And we also need to make sure that fees that are charged at the border make sense and really reflect what's going on at the border. We sometimes have this little problem with fees that are imposed that are kind of revenue generating, and we really need to make sure that that's not the case. So in conclusion, the U.S.-Canada relationship here to stay. I'm happy to say we're delighted at CN to be part of it and to be a really important part of that. Amgad Shahada yesterday spoke about the importance of synchronized commerce. And I think that's a great term because it really is what this is all about. And we need to make sure that our two countries continue to work together as they have very effectively in the past, but that the private sector is a key part of these initiatives, that we're all working together to keep the border as fluid as possible, to enhance our overall competitiveness, each country and North America's, keep trade flowing, but also keep it secure. Again, it's a real pleasure to be here. Delighted to be here. Thank you, Anne-Marie, to you and your team for your hospitality. It's really been great, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you. Thank you very much.